Hello and welcome to J Walitalo Woodburning. This will be a basic introduction to woodburning, and we'll go over the tracing method. So first, here's some of my basic equipment. I can keep all of it in one toolbox, except for the wood. And I have a variety of craft wood burners. It doesn't really matter what brand you use. The first step is we're going to get something to trace. And we're going to start with leaves. So go outside and pick a tree and find some leaves on it that you can reach. Figure out what type of tree it is using any good tree ID guide. Once you figure out what type of tree it is, then you can press the leaves. Put the leaves inside of a book and then stack some other heavy books on top of it. That will flatten your leaf so that you can trace it later. If you're doing this all at once, you don't have to press the leaves. You can use them right away and just take a pencil and trace around the edge of the leaf. Here you can see that I am tracing even all the little tiny serrations around the edge of the leaf. The leaf margin or edge can help you identify what type of leaf it is. Based on the pattern of the serrations, the size, the shape, there's a whole bunch of different characteristics that can help you ID what type of tree you're looking at. And the leaves have many, many different characteristics. So all you need is a regular pencil and eraser. I tend not to erase, but with at least not until I'm completely done with the wood burning. But if you make a mistake, if the leaf shifts on you at all while you're tracing it, you can erase at this stage, and that's fine. And you can see here when I'm doing the stems and the twig, everything shifts a little bit on me. But I can hold it down with one finger and trace with the other hand. And it helps if you hold the leaf down kind of in the middle while you're tracing. You also can see that the first leaf I traced shifted while I went to the second leaf. That's okay. Sometimes the wind blows, sometimes things move. The important part is you want to get the overall shape of the leaf correct. So while you're tracing one leaf, you don't want that to move at all. But if you have multiple leaves and you're tracing them onto the page, it doesn't matter if one leaf shifts while you're doing a different one. Fairly straightforward there. Now you have an outline of your leaves. Now I'm going to come back and do the veins in the leaf, starting at the tip and going to the stem. Just a simple line, and then the secondary veins coming out from the primary vein. They angle back toward the stem. Also, if you look very, very carefully, the veins don't quite line up where they meet the center vein. They're offset by just a little bit. That can be another really important ID feature. So I want to make sure I capture that in my drawing. Again, come back over to the other leaf and do the same thing, the primary middle vein and then the secondary veins coming out from it. I also add a little bit of detail here with some insect damage on the leaf. Not all leaves are perfect, and it's interesting to capture some of the inconsistencies. It can also be a very good biological indicator for looking for invasive species or what type of pests are around. So now we have a very simple drawing of a leaf, and go back to the book for a second and look at what type of leaf did you pick, what type of tree did you pick. You want to write the name on that as well. I also did the scientific name. Now we're going to switch over to the wood burner. We have a variety of different tips that we can use for the wood burner. Tips or nibs, the part that actually gets hot, I'm going to change out the tip here. The first step is using a pair of pliers to loosen it up, and then once it's loose, I can unscrew it the rest of the way with my fingers. I'm actually putting the same tip, this is the Chisel Tip, which I feel is the most versatile, into a different wood burner that I prefer. The only reason that I prefer this wood burning tool is because I like the color. There's a huge variety of craft wood burners or solid tip wood burners that you can use. And I tighten the tip with my fingers till it's tight, and then I just tighten it a little bit more with the pliers. I also make sure that the pliers are back from the part that I actually touch the wood with. That way I don't make any dents or marks in the surface that burns the wood. Then you turn it on, and it takes a little while to heat up. You can put your hand about an inch over top of the wood burner and feel the heat coming off it. Then you know you're ready to start wood burning. So the Chisel Tip is the most versatile. You can get a straight line by placing the flat edge directly up and down on the wood. You can use it as a point, like a pencil tip, and make very narrow curved lines, as you can see here with the P and the A. There's a few things that you'll notice. If you look carefully, you can see the wood grain, and you can see that the wood grain burns unevenly as I'm going about this. That's just a characteristic of the wood. You can compensate for that by burning a longer amount of time on the late wood or the darker lines on the wood here, and burning for a shorter time on the early wood or the lighter areas between the dark lines on the wood surface there. That's different characteristics of the wood grain itself, how dense the cells are packed. And that's based on the growth rate of the tree. Earlier in the spring, it grows faster, and so each cell is larger. Later in the summer and over winter, fall, when there's less moisture and less growth going on, that's called late wood, those darker lines. And they burn slower. It's a slower growth period for the tree. So the cells are smaller and more densely packed. You can create dots just by using the very, very tip of the chisel tip. And it takes a little bit of time to do all of this. You'll notice there's no smoke produced when you're wood burning like this. And that is correct and accurate. That's the way it should be. If you're getting smoke produced, you're probably burning too hot. Some of the craft wood burners will have a temperature setting, a knob that you can turn the temperature up or down. The ones that I typically use do not have that. They just have a simple on and off. And you can control how dark you burn based on how fast you move the tip of the wood burner across the surface of the wood. Here on the B, you can see very, very clearly how the early wood burns thicker and darker than the late wood. And you can see how putting the wood burner directly like a knife edge can help with a straight line with the lettering there, the T. But then when you go to do a curved line, I use the very tip again instead of the entire edge. So different techniques of handling the same tip will help you in different circumstances. You don't have to change tips all the time. The chisel tip may not be the most ideal for doing lettering. There are smooth rounded tips that help with doing rounded lines or curved lines. I prefer to use one tip primarily because I'm impatient. To change tips out or change the nibs out, nibs are a very official term for the wood burning tip. The proper way to do it, the best way to handle the tool is to turn it off, let it cool down all the way, and then remove the tip, put a new tip in, turn it back on, and let it heat back up. That process, depending on the brand you have, can take anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes. And I get impatient, so I would rather personally just use one tip and learn how to use that one tip for pretty much everything that I do, rather than changing tips out all the time. There is no right and wrong to this, however. You can use whatever tip you feel most comfortable with or what gives you the best results. So here we've got the scientific name and the common name for this tree. It's a paper birch, Betula papyrifera. And if I were being very scientifically accurate, I would underline the scientific name or put it in italics, or when I'm handwriting it, cursive, to indicate that it's the scientific name. And then I start going through and outlining the leaf itself. And you can see I'm just playing with it right now. This is a demonstration. So I'm using the heel of the chisel tip here and just kind of rocking it back and forth, lifting it up between each rocking to make the little serration along the edge of the leaf, and then playing around with it. Let's try the tip rather than the heel of the nib. It's also very convenient to do straight or flowing curved lines. Basically holding the edge of the wood burner and drawing like a pencil. So you can get the stem of the leaf and get the little bud down in there that's in between the two leaves that will develop into a new leaf later on, or grow out to become part of the twig and stem. And then the twig here, I'm going to pull the wood burner sideways a little bit to get a wider burn. And this, you want to go slow. The slower you go, the darker you will get a burn. You don't have to press down hard at all. You want to keep a very light hand when you're wood burning. Part of the reasons behind going slow and not pressing down hard, keeping it very, very light on the surface of the wood, for how much pressure you're putting on the wood burner, is that you have a very hot object, piece of metal, and if you press down hard, it can break. I've broken several tips where the screw part breaks in the wood burning tool and the tip falls off, the nib falls off, and you can't really do anything to get the screw out. You can drill it out and whatnot, but it's a lot of work to try to fix that if they break in the tool itself. So just keeping very light pressure, but going very slow will help you get a very dark burn. And here you can see I'm using the tip of the nib, the chisel tip, to outline this leaf. So you can use the heel or the very tip, the very point, to make very detailed, accurate lines. And you just want to kind of play around with it, get used to the tool at this point, get used to how it feels and what it looks like when you do different things. So, for example, if I want a very, very sharp edge on one side, I can hold the wood burner at a little bit of an angle and pull inwards. That creates shading on one side, but a very sharp edge on the other side. And most of the images that I do have shading on one side and a very sharp direct edge on the other side. This is a very easy technique for me to create a boundary between objects or the edge of an object. And it makes it so that I don't have to worry about the wood grain itself, those early growth and late growth, causing different thicknesses in the line that I'm making. So we're getting to the point where we can kind of get the feel of a leaf here. And come back over and do the last side of the last leaf. Here again, I'm pulling the wood burner toward me at about a 45-degree angle. So I'm getting the tip as a very sharp edge and then shading inwards that fades out. And you always want to keep your work area clean, so you'll notice that I don't have random scraps of paper, and I moved the leaf off of my work area so that I don't catch it on fire. Wood takes a lot of heat to actually catch on fire when you're talking about a large chunk of wood. However, if you have a very dry leaf or any paper nearby, that could catch on fire from the tip of the wood burner. So you always want to make sure that your work area is clean and clear so that you don't accidentally touch something that could catch on fire. Same with if you have long hair, you want to tie that back in a ponytail or some way so that it doesn't fall into your work area. Because hair catches on fire very, very easily and smells really bad. So just be safe about things. Some people wear gloves when they're working. Some people have trouble with how hot the tip gets. Also, be careful about how close your fingers are. I know I'm working fairly close to my own fingers right here, and I've had a lot of practice, but you always want to hang on to your piece of wood away from where you're burning so that you don't accidentally touch your fingers with the wood burner, because it is hot and it will burn you. As I was saying, some people wear gloves to help protect them from the heat. I prefer to hold the wood burner at more of a 45-degree angle, and the heat rises up, so my hand is out of the direct path of the heat rising. That helps me. I feel that gloves tend to just make it kind of clunky for me to work, and it also is one more thing that I have to then visually be paying attention to make sure that I don't touch the glove to the hot part of the wood burner, and I don't want it to catch on fire either. I would rather be paying attention to visually watch the wood burning that I'm doing and the artistic part of what I'm doing, rather than have other things distracting me that I have to keep track of while I'm wood burning. So far we're still just basically tracing the pencil lines that we've done. And it looks pretty good. So the next step will be coming back in and shading. And shading is fun because you can darken a very large area fairly quickly by holding the wood burner on its side a little bit, more of it at an angle, and pulling the wood burner across the surface of the wood to shade in a large area at one time. You'll also notice, if you look very carefully here, that I'm coming almost up to the lines that I did for the vein, but not quite touching them. So that gives a little line that has not been burnt at all, which really helps make those veins pop out of the leaf. Gives it more of a three-dimensional effect. And you can play with this. You can play with how long you let the wood burner sit in one place to get a darker burn, or moving it quicker across the surface to make it fade out and get lighter as you go. You can see here that I'm starting along one vein and pulling down with the wood burner, and then slowly lifting it up so that it fades out to before it hits the next vein. And that gives a more contrast throughout the leaf, and it lets you see the veins in the leaf. It kind of creates a three-dimensional effect, even though leaves are fairly flat. But if you look, there is a little bit of a rise or dip, depending on the species of leaf you have, between veins. They do have some texture to them, and you can capture all of that in a wood burning, visually portraying it. So practice different techniques, see what works best for you. These are just some tips and tricks that I have picked up over time and working and practicing and experimenting in different ways. But I do really encourage you to experiment with this. Get a feel for what you like and what works and what doesn't work for you. And just try it. Just try different things. See how long it takes to hold the wood burner in one place to get it really, really black. See how long it takes to move the wood burner across the wood to get different shading effects. Here I'm going back through and doing just a hint of shading on the stem of each leaf, so that you have some indication of the stem being three-dimensional or round. And let's see, what else is there? You can definitely go out and get different leaves. These are just practice, 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 practice. And this is one example, but this is a really good activity to go out and actually learn different types of trees, learn different leaves. You can incorporate different aspects. In the original picture where we went out and looked at the tree actually had the catkins, the reproductive structures showing as well. You can add those. Bark is another really interesting thing to try to depict in wood burning, or in any media for that matter, but trying to depict the bark of the tree, or any other small natural objects you find around, you can add in and incorporate into your wood burning. You can also look at the light and the sun, how the sun is hitting the leaves. Here I'm doing it indoors, and I'm doing it as a flat leaf, but you can do them from different angles, and have different light sources, create different shadow effects. There's a lot that you can do with very simple tools and just what you have right around you. So at this point, I really hope that you're getting some ideas and you're getting excited about this. You can see how we went from a very simple line drawing in pencil to having something that looks much more realistic and much more three-dimensional just by adding a little bit of shading. You can also do the opposite effect, and you can do the leaf with and depict the lines for the veins, and then you can burn the background black, and that can give a very stark appearance that's really eye-catching. So the last part of any artwork that you do, I want you to always sign your name and put the date on it. This is very, very important for like records throughout history. No artist ever becomes famous if they never sign their work. So whether you have the goal of becoming a famous artist or not, always, always sign your work. Always take credit for what you do and be proud of it. Again, here, this is one place where I may change tips, change the nibs on the woodburner and use a more rounded tip in order to have a more fluent, flowing signature. But I'm also slightly impatient and I don't want to wait 10 minutes for one to cool off and then the other one to heat up. So sometimes I just use the same chisel tip to do my signature. It doesn't matter. It's whatever your preference is. Sometimes you may want to do 3 or 4 wood burnings with one tip and then wait until you have 3 or 4 of them done before you change tips and go back and sign all of them at once. Putting the year on it is important just because after 10 or 15 years, it's hard to remember when you did it. And also when you're doing biological illustrations like this, if you have something like very specific insect damage that you're depicting, it's really good for historical records that we can go through and see what year that insect damage occurred. Things like that to keep in mind, to have, you can add information like the location along with the date. I number my wood burnings by the year, so I will put the year and then a dash and then a number which indicates that's for this one, the 32nd wood burning that I've done this year. And then you want to turn your wood burner off and unplug it. Wait until you can no longer feel any heat coming off from it, and the wood burning portion of your artwork is done. Now we need to put a hanger on it. The easy way to put a hanger on it is to take a piece of paper, fold the corner over, mark where the folds are, and then use those 2 marks to line up with the corners of the wood and mark where the corner of the paper is. This gives you 2 even marks to put your screws in. Put your screws in about halfway. This is really easy if you're using softwood board, any type of pine, spruce, fir. Usually you can just put the screws in by hand. If you're using a hardwood like maple or ash or oak, then sometimes you'll need to pre-drill your holes for your screws to go in because the wood is so much harder that it sometimes will crack when you try to put your screws in. Take a piece of wire, and when your screws are halfway in, curl one end around one screw, kind of stretch it out, cut it a little bit longer than the next screw so it goes a little bit past. That way you can bend the wire around the second screw. And once you have your wire around 1 or 2, usually 2 times, then you can take your screwdriver, come back and screw your screw in the rest of the way, tighten it down. Depending on how tight you get it, you may want to hang on to your wire because sometimes the screw will catch and tighten your wire as you're screwing it. You can also go through and add just a drop of hot glue on top of the screws. That will help cover the pokey end of your wire and keep the screws from scratching a wall when you hang it. The last step for protecting your wood burning is to put a finish on it. We tend to use polyurethane. There's different types of finishes. You can use varnishes, or there's some that come in a spray form. There's some people will use beeswax finish. Other people, if you're doing wood burnings on something like wooden spoons that you're going to use for eating or cutting boards, Linseed oil is a good finish. You want to start at the edges and pull toward